Tim is the current president of TNTP, and as you all know, TNTP is a leading source, and I would say the leading source in innovative research around teacher quality and teaching quality issues. He began his tenure at TNTP in 2001. He was a New York City Teaching Fellow, a program which many of you know has helped grow into one of the leading providers of new teachers in what is our nation's largest district. Nearly 10,000 New York City teaching and special education teachers are currently working in city classrooms and accounting for 1 in 5 science teachers and 1 in 4 math and special ed teachers across New York City. Prior to becoming TNTP's president in 2007, Tim served as the vice president for policy and played a key role in the publication of The Widget Effect, which you all remember for our steering committee members in 2009 was a great inspiration for that important lever that really grounded us in this concept of effective teaching. We really appreciate the work that he has done to continue beyond the widget effect, really into the irreplaceables, which is the understanding of real retention crisis in America's urban schools. We're so thrilled to have you with us today.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. As Jamie mentioned, some of you may remember that I was here in 2009. I think it was probably May of 2009. And we had not yet published The Widget Effect. I did like a sneak preview for this group of folks. And at that time, just to refresh your memories, Race to the Top was a vague notion that had been announced, but the initial regulations for the contest had not yet been released, and then they did some revisions, and then you all applied and became one of the first states to win, and all sorts of stuff happened nationally that you have been at the forefront of. And I think it's important to reflect on the fact that this is probably the most concentrated period of change in our nation's educational history. Never before have this many different states been acting at the same time to change standards and to change the ways of teaching. So if it feels like a lot's happening, that's true. And nobody has done more than you all have in the last couple of years. So it's an honor to be with you. We started this process of working on this report, which I'm going to give you an overview of, because there's been this idea for decades that every student deserves a good teacher. And in fact, that has been one of the focal points of federal policy ever since there has been federal education policy. And yet every single study that looks at the distribution of teachers finds these very big imbalances. Typically, the students that are lower income or lower achieving never get what appears to be their fair share of good teachers, no matter how you measure it. So you can measure it based on how experienced the teachers are, how well they seem to know their content area, how often they've majored in the content that they're teaching. You could look at it based on their past performance. So what we were attracted to is this idea that everyone says there is this goal, and some people use even stronger language and say it's a right, and yet we cannot point to a single state that has ever even come close to achieving delivery on that. We are stymied by this challenge of how do we get great teachers and keep great teachers in communities that most need them. And we wondered, why is that? So if this is something that everyone agrees on and that has been a goal for a long time, why have we fallen so far short? And it could be two things. One thing, and people said this to us a lot, is these things are out of our control, meaning that teacher distribution is a function of a number of things that we could not hope to impact through policy or changes in practice. So for instance, some people have said the teachers that are really good simply do not want to work with students that have the most challenges. Why would they want to do that? They're always going to want to work with higher achieving students on balance, so they're going to migrate that direction. And there's a whole strand of research on labor markets in education that essentially has made this argument. The second possibility is that we are not approaching the challenge in the right way. And that's what we were curious about. Is there something different that we could be doing that would get us different results? And I'll cut right to the point, the punchline. After we worked on this report for almost 3 years, about 2.5. And at the end of it, we concluded that the thing that we could do that is most likely to improve student outcomes in every school is staring us right in the face. And that is, we need to do a much better job on teacher retention, and I'll explain how. But this is something that is not just staring us in the face, it's very visible to us. When a great teacher leaves a school, it's not like we don't know that. It's not like it's a mystery to us. Sometimes in school, these things are kind of intangible, and we think maybe the math curriculum is scaffolded wrong. It's the kind of thing that we just wouldn't observe, and it takes years to see it. When great teachers leave, we know because they just walked right out the front door. And this is also something that every single school can do. It's not a robbing Peter to pay Paul thing where we need to get all the good teachers who are over here and get them to move over here so somebody's going to be the net loser in that transaction. In fact, so many people just leave entirely and don't teach anywhere that if we just convince the people who are good at teaching, who are already teaching the kids that we care deeply about, to keep teaching the kids that we care about, and we did that consistently over time, we could utterly change the mathematics of the situation. So it's staring us in the face, but we have really struggled to do it. So I'm going to tell you the story today of what we learned about that, and then we'll talk a bit about what we do with it. This study was released just at the end of July. I think it was July 30th in Washington, D.C. We did it with the help of the Secretary of Education, Arnie Duncan, and Becky Pringle, who's a vice president of the National Education Association. Since that time, we've had a lot of conversations like this, and I think some of you were at a conversation we had in August with the superintendents. I hope that you'll do two things today. One is push me, because we're the best consumers of research when we think not just about what we're learning from it, but also what does not resonate with your experience that we're going to talk about. Question the things that I say we found, because we may find things that are simply not relevant to where you are. And then secondly, what surprises you about this that you feel is actionable where you are, that could actually change something that's happening in your school or in your district. All right. The irreplaceables are folks who are so good that if they leave a school, we are mathematically unlikely to replace them with somebody who is as good. These are teachers who get, on average, about 3 months more of learning per school year than an average teacher. And a low-performing teacher gets about 3 months less of learning than the typical teacher. So overall, it's about 6 months of difference in learning from a high performer to a low performer per year. And we were looking at these folks because the more of these teachers you have, the better everything goes. The more teachers like this you have in the school, the better the school. The more you got in the district, the better the district. These people are the ones that make us all look like geniuses because they fix problems. Kids are behind in math. If they have a bunch of these teachers, they can catch way up. These are the people that keep our schools very healthy. We looked at 4 urban school districts in this study. I'm going to tell you who some of them are. In all the slides that I show, they're just going to be called District A, B, C, and D, but I'm going to be able to share with you who some of them are. And they're very big districts. So collectively, these districts have over 1.4 million students in them. One of the things that was tough about doing this study is that we had to decide how do you measure if somebody is irreplaceable. And to do it across this many districts at once who have very different ways of identifying their effective teachers, we used value-added scores. Here they'd be called TVAS scores. But there are lots of other ways that you could use to do that. And it's one of the limitations of the approach we took. But we didn't want to gloss over that. So we thought a lot about, would we identify similar teachers if we had used other measures? And one of the other things you can do is survey the kids. So if you look at teachers that get very high growth on their tests and teachers that get very low growth, it turns out that at the secondary level, the students actually have a very different opinion about what's going on in the classroom, even on questions that don't really have anything to do with test scores. So for instance, on the far right, my teacher makes learning enjoyable. High value-added teachers have a 20-point gap with low value-added teachers. Things like my teacher doesn't let people give up when the work gets hard. There's a sizable gap. Even on something like students in this class treat the teacher with respect. That's one of the biggest gaps, 24 points. So if you think about this, we are not asking them, does our teacher help us prepare well for the end-of-year exam? We're actually asking something that is completely different from that. Some of these are very social-related questions, and yet the teachers that do well on one thing often do well on the other. So here's how the numbers look. Here's where the math comes into it, and I apologize that I talk quickly, so please raise your hand if I am speed reading too much. An irreplaceable in the typical school is somebody who's good enough that it would take 6 hires to find somebody who's around that good. But in a low-performing school, it's 11. And that's because these schools have fewer people that are trying to teach there. They generally have more vacancies to fill. they fill their vacancies later in the hiring process. Essentially, these schools are places that are hiring more often out of desperation. And when they do that, they find great teachers less often. In the course of hiring 11 folks in and finding that irreplaceable, they are probably going to hire 2 or 3 low-performing teachers. So if you think about where you are or where you have taught before, and you think of a school that year after year has a lot of spots to fill, and occasionally there's a great teacher in that school, sometimes they stay and sometimes they don't. But that is a school that always seems to be running in place. People go in, people go out. And the aggregate faculty never seems to get much stronger than it was before. That's exactly what we saw in hundreds and hundreds of schools. It's not that there are no good teachers that are there. It's a myth about low-performing schools that everyone there is doing a poor job. In fact, we found great teachers in just about every school we looked at. The problem really was ratio. How many? And how long do they stay there? So when we looked at the retention at the school level in these districts, and this is the school level now, not how many stay in the district, but in the school, what we found is that the old way of thinking about retention did not tell us what we wanted to know. The old way of thinking about retention is the more teachers stay, the better. The problem is that that equates the best and worst outcome as being the same thing. The best outcome is that great teachers stay, keep doing what they were doing. The worst outcome is that somebody who's ineffective stays and keeps doing what they were doing. When all you do is measure retention in the aggregate, you treat both of those outcomes as equally good. And that is crazy. So if you think about a company who measures its outcome, it's as if they said, we don't care if we make a lot of money or lose a lot of money as long as it's a lot of money. We're going to take the absolute value of that number and the best and worst outcome and smash them together. That is exactly, that is how crazy it is. Or it's like a baseball team saying it doesn't matter how many games we win or how many games we lose, it's just how many games we played in. It's that kind of thing. And what we found is that in these districts, the district that under the old measure would have been identified as the healthiest was District D, because District D retains the most of its teachers at the school level. The problem is that District D also retains the most low-performing teachers at the school level. So in essence, District D is completely running in place. It actually might be healthier to be District B, which retains fewer teachers, but at least retains somewhat more of its higher performing teachers than its lower performing teachers. And so this got us to thinking about the difference between the top and bottom performing retention. 3 of these 4 districts self-identified after we released the report. District A is Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools in North Carolina. District B is the only district that did not self-identify. I won't tell you their name because I think they will self-identify at some point, but if I had you name 10 or 12 well-known reform-oriented urban districts, most of you would probably name District B. District C is Houston, Texas, and District D, the one that under the old measure looks so good and under the new measure doesn't look so good, is our nation's largest school district, New York City. And the mayor of that city, Michael Bloomberg, issued a press release the day that we issued this report to announce himself as the low-performing District D. So here's the next thing we had to confront. If you retain low performers, can you make them better? And we cannot answer that question with the methodology we had because every one of these districts is doing different things. And unfortunately, according to the teachers, many of them are not doing much. But what we could answer is, do they improve? Not can they improve, but do they improve? This one's kind of complicated, so let me explain. We looked at the teachers in say, year 0, and we said, who are the teachers in that year who were the lowest performing? And since the districts keep almost all of them, we could fast forward with them 3 years and see how they did. And as a group, some of them got better, but most of them did not. And in fact, as a group, the teachers that were low performing in the base year, 3 years later, were still not even as effective as the average first-year teacher in those districts. So after 3 years of doing whatever they were doing in these districts to make these people better, we would have been better off taking somebody off the street who had never taught before and putting them in those classrooms. So here's how it looks. Those teachers that were low performing in the past tended to be between the 35th and 40th percentile. And new teachers were about the 45th percentile in their first year. After their 3rd year, new teachers tended to be at about the 51st. So again, this does not answer the question of whether professional development works. But it does suggest strongly that what we are doing in these districts is not working. So we keep almost all of the ineffective teachers, and we do not improve them very much at all. That means that we need to change one of those two things. One of them has to change, or we will continue to get similar results. One of the things that we wondered about was, is it the same in every type of subject area? Because some districts have a surplus of elementary teachers, but they have a very hard time finding a good science teacher. So in District C, we looked at whether new teachers coming in, even in shortage areas like science, were going to be better than a low-performing teacher. And it turned out it was 73% of the time, a brand new hire. Now, these are the folks they really did hire. These are not imaginary teachers. It's not a projection. 73% of the time, the newcomer did better. And even when there was a transfer, and principals often told us, sometimes I keep somebody who's struggling because I'm very afraid that the district is going to push me to hire somebody from another school that someone else didn't want, and I'd rather keep the person I know who I think I can work with. Turns out 70% of the time, that's the wrong choice. 70% of the time, the person who transfers in from somewhere else did better. So here's the crisis. The crisis is not that we lose too many teachers. That's only part of the problem. The problem is that we are almost completely indiscriminate about the teachers that we lose. We need to make sure that if someone's going to leave, it cannot be these folks that are really doing a fantastic job, the irreplaceables. And there are three big reasons that they tend to leave. I'll give you just a snapshot of each one. The first one is poor leadership practices. Those are the things that principals do or don't do. The second one, working conditions, is different a bit. It is what it feels like to be in the school, and that is a function of many things, not just what the principal does, but the entire environment and climate in the school. It's more intangible, and it's a product of many different forces. And the third one is counterproductive policies. When we do this, almost always one of these three things is nearer and dearer to each of our hearts because it resonates more. And the temptation is to just go right after that thing. What we learned is going after any one of them in isolation has very limited effect because if the other two are not being dealt with, they overwhelm the influence of fixing the one. So you got to kind of do all three. And it's because you got to do three things at once that it feels like juggling, and it's hard. It's hard to turn something around where you need to maybe do 3 out of 3 things right, where maybe currently we're doing 0 or 1. So when it comes to the principal actions, we first had to answer the question, would these people stay if we did something different? And the answer there was about 3 out of 4 high-performing teachers that say they're going to leave would stay if we address their biggest reason for leaving. They're leaving to do things like teach at another school right nearby, or take a different job in education that is out of the classroom because they're so frustrated by what's happening around them. We also found that some of them become principals. And in one of the districts that we surveyed in, we found, this is hard to believe, so stick with me here, 60% of the people who were serving as principals in this district said they would not have become a principal in the first place if they could have made as much money as they're making now as a teacher. 60% basically said, I didn't want to do this. I just do this because it pays more than what I was doing before. So if any of you have had some principals that seem like they don't want their job and wish they were back teaching 11th grade, it may be literally the case. Now, there were 8 things that in every single district made a big difference. And this was one of the things that we always do these kind of hypotheses beforehand from folks to say, what do you think we're going to find? And a lot of the folks that are experts in our field told us that these things would be appreciated but would not be shown to have any effect. So teachers would like it when principals do this, but wouldn't impact their decision. It turned out all 8 of them have a statistically significant effect on decision-making of teachers, and most of them are cheap or free. So the kinds of things a principal can do that increase retention of high performers would be give them regular positive feedback. Also, give them critical feedback. So teachers like it when you give them praise and criticism. Do both of them, it's more powerful than doing just one. What was interesting about these things, though, is that you don't have to do all 8. If just 2 of them are true, it doubles the teacher's planned retention in the school. So just 2. And we can keep our teachers who are thinking, I'm going to stay 2 more years, we can keep them 4 years. Just this alone. Now, let's see how we're doing. It turns out that principals don't do these things very often at all. In fact, less than half of the high-performing teachers say anybody has ever told them that they're high-performing. And these are places where both the teachers and the principals have their value-added scores. So the teacher knows that they are high-performing. They have the score that says that, but they say that their principals don't say that to them. Just below that, we found that in this district that I have the slide up for, principals were more likely to suggest career ladder roles for teachers that were low-performing than high-performing. Now, I'm going to pick on one of my teachers. Why would that be, Marlon? Why do you think they would recommend that low-performing teachers pursue career ladder roles?
Because it's job security. As far as like the tenure role, from my aspect, it's a lot of teachers that are tenured right now that sit behind the desk on their computer all day, not teaching bell to bell because they know they're not going to get replaced.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why they're preferring the pay schedule as far as you get paid so much money a year, your career ladder and degree level. And to be honest with you, I think that needs to be replaced.
Yeah.
As far as performance things.
I think that what our experience was pretty close to what you're saying. What we heard from teachers when we focus group this was this didn't surprise them at all. In fact, they used to giggle and laugh sometimes when we would show this because they would say, we did that at my school. For instance, they would say, we had a teacher that we were struggling with and we put her up for coach because then she wouldn't be teaching kids. We get somebody else, and we don't really need the we don't interact with the coach that much anyway, so it made the problem go away. So sometimes we create these roles that are meant to lift teachers up, and the perception in the profession is that's a place you put somebody who is bad at teaching, which is not healthy. And then lastly, about 2/3 of irreplaceables. Now think about this: 63% of them say no one in their school leadership has ever asked them to stay at the school. In 2/3 of cases, nobody. We said assistant principal, principal, department chair. These are the people that change kids' lives, and no one could find time to say, we can't do this without you. I hope you're happy. I hope you have the grade level that you want. In 2/3 of cases, that was true. The second thing that we looked at was working conditions. Now, it is not a surprise to most people that in a school with a positive culture, the teachers are much more likely to agree with the statement on the left than teachers in schools with a negative culture. And the statement is, there is an atmosphere of mutual respect and trust. Everybody wants that. And the way that we define positive culture is that there's a set of questions that if teachers say yes to it, they're much more likely to stay in the school, and the school will have high retention rates and high student achievement. And the set of questions is there a clear vision for great teaching in my school, as broadly shared by all faculty, and is my school committed to making me better? So those are the high culture school is a place where the faculty agree with that. The more surprising part, though, was that principals said one of the reasons that they do not address low performance and the reason that they have that same retention level of high and low performers is because if they address low performance, it is a culture poison. They said that even the teachers in their building who are stronger teachers and should have no reason to be concerned, will band together and defend a teacher who is being targeted for improvement or potentially dismissal, because that's what teachers do. They close ranks. And so they don't do it. That's what they said. That's the main reason. But what confused us about this was teachers were actually much more likely to say that in buildings that were healthy that teachers were seeking to stay in, teachers said the opposite. They were much more likely to say low performance is dealt with in their building. And when low performance is not dealt with, it made them more likely to leave. So for some reason, the culture has taught principals a lesson that actually undermines their ability to be successful. It drives them to do something that is not going to make their building stronger and may actually drive some of their good teachers away. Here's the big challenge for those of you who teach in areas that either have great socioeconomic diversity or concentrations of poverty. When it comes to working conditions, there's a whole battery of things that low-income, low-proficiency schools tend to do worse on when it comes to working conditions. Those are things like teachers are less satisfied with the school's reputation for achievement, parent engagement, student conduct, student safety, goes down the list. You can't change a school's location, for instance. That's going to be tough. So if it's a bad commute for teachers, and we want to accumulate and maintain a concentration of great teachers over time, you may start with a whole set of challenges that we have to overcome. Therefore, if you have working conditions challenges of that nature and everything else is equal, you have an equal principal, you have equal principal actions to retain teachers and so on, you may still lose. So the reason that this goal has been so elusive is that the only way to overcome this is to build a set of advantages for schools that are lower income and lower proficiency and maintain those over time, so you could then develop and maintain concentrations of really good teachers. Essentially what we found is evenness across the board will not be enough. At the district level, one of the other things that is worrisome is policy. So we asked the teachers, how many of you who are irreplaceable agree that your district has policies in place right now to retain effective teachers? And the answer was 9%. So over 90% of teachers basically said, I don't think my district is focused on this. And only about 20% of principals see their district as having those kinds of policies in place. What we heard here was a litany of complaints from high-performing teachers, especially early in their career, who said, there are things in place that explicitly undervalue me. And we asked, well, what would those things be? And one of them, the teachers in the focus group said, I have won Teacher of the Year 2 years in a row at my school. I cannot get a raise for staying at my school, but I can get a raise by going anywhere else. Every single other district around me pays more money. If I become an assistant principal, I get a raise. If I become a coach, I get a raise. There is almost nothing I can do to, if I leave my classroom, that doesn't benefit me more. But the salary schedule in my district has me scheduled to make a top step in 24 years. What are the odds that I'm going to do that? There's zero. The odds that somebody who is a star early career teacher is going to wait 2 decades to make an income that allows them to buy a home and raise a family are zero. And more than half of irreplaceables in districts that we studied were gone by year 6. So if you think about this, these are not people who had potential to be good. They're not like projected future #1 draft picks. These are people who came into their district and by their 2nd and 3rd year were in the top quintile of performance. And many of them racked up honors. Half of them are not teaching in those districts by year 6. So if you think about the goals that we have, accumulating great numbers of teachers and having them serve the kids that we need most, we have lost the game by that point. There is no way from here to there if the statistics remain that way. So the 2 conclusions we drew are, first of all, we have thousands of schools across the country that are not only struggling now, but have often been struggling for decades. And if our retention patterns remain what they are, it is mathematically impossible that those schools are going to turn themselves around. It just doesn't work. None of this should be a mystery, given the practices that we've seen here, the inflow and outflow of great teachers. And secondly, for decades, we have been puzzled by the fact that in other countries, teaching is often viewed as a top-tier profession that is hard to get into, that is prestigious for the people that do it, and that is seen as honorable. And that has not been the case here. It's hard to imagine how that could happen, given all of these factors. So teaching seems to lack both respect and rigor. Teachers aren't treated with respect in their workplace or by their administrators, but there's also no rigor. And everybody that we focus group this with, who's outside of education, says, oh, I know a lot of folks that are great teachers. A lot of my family members are teachers, and I think they're great at it. The problem is I also know a whole bunch of people that are in teaching that I wouldn't trust to dog sit for me. And that perception sticks. So when teaching is a profession where you have both respect and rigor at the same time, we think this will change. I'm not sure that doing one or the other is going to do any good at all. Because if all you do is raise respect, we could raise the retention of all teachers. The problem is that low-performing teachers respond to that intervention more than high-performing teachers do. Everyone wants to stay in a place where they're treated well, and it's no surprise that even if you're not doing a great job, you're going to stay. But if all you have is rigor and not respect, the great teachers are going to leave. You may get rid of your bad teachers, but you're going to lose your good teachers as well. So it's got to be 2 things at the same time. The question is how we do that. And I think that we are trying to change cultural practices that are so deeply ingrained in the way that we have run our schools that this is nothing short of remaking the way that we conceive of the education profession for both our teachers and leaders. So that's it. I'm gonna the recommendations I won't belabor because I think we can talk about those on the panel. But in essence, we believe we got to do both sides, the respect side and the rigor side, and we have some specific ideas on how to do that. I think you all probably are going to move faster, more affirmatively. You'll move faster than we do, and so I'd rather hear your ideas than go through ours. So we'll move to the panel.